Narrator, Theo. They came not with fire, but with silence. Not with warships, but with shimmering arcs of impossible light that stitched the void together like cosmic thread. They called themselves the Kanthar Collective. And they called Earth an exist. The year was 2047. Humanity, bruised but unbowed, had clawed its way to the stars, only to find the stars already claimed. The Kanthar weren't conquerors in the old brutal sense. They were curators, archivists of life, and they decided humanity was too volatile, too dangerous to be left loose in the galaxy. So they built a cage, a beautiful gilded galaxy-spanning cage. They called it the Terran Preserve. From orbit, it looked like paradise. Verdant continents, sapphire oceans, cities gleaming like scattered jewels under twin suns. But paradise has walls. Invisible walls woven from gravity wells and temporal distortions, patrolled by silent obsidian drones the size of mountains, and paradise has keepers. The Cathar, tall, slender beings of iridescent chitin, and multifaceted eyes that saw not just light but the very pulse of life force. They moved with a grace that felt alien, unsettling, a ballet of detached observation. They provided clean energy, advanced medicine, endless data streams, but they watched, always watched. Their presence was a constant, low hum in the bones of every human, a reminder, you are observed, you are contained, you are a specimen. For 50 years, humanity simmered. Generations born under the Cathar's benevolent, suffocating gaze. Some accepted it, found comfort in the safety, the absence of war, famine, true scarcity. Others remembered the taste of real freedom. The sting of unfiltered starlight, the terrifying, exhilarating chaos of forging your own destiny among the infinite dark. And then, the cracks began to show. Rain slicked the neon-drenched streets of New Atlantis, a city built on reclaimed ocean. Its spires piercing low-hanging clouds tinged violet by the preserve's artificial sky dome. Inside a cramped, steam-fogged noodle bar, tucked beneath a flickering holographic ad for Cathar-approved nutrient paste, Jax Renner hunched over a bowl, his knuckles white around cheap chopsticks. He wasn't eating, he was listening. Across the scarred plastic table, Ilara Voss traced the rim of her untouched synth teacup, her sharp eyes scanning the room with the weary vigilance of a predator in a cage. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face and the faint scar bisecting her left eyebrow, a souvenir from a containment incident during her brief, disastrous stint in the Cathar-sanctioned Peacekeeper Corps. Still nothing? Jax's voice was a low rasp, barely audible over the hiss of the rain and the clatter of distant kitchens. He didn't look up. Ilara's gaze flickered to the door. The usual static, like they're jamming everything except the official feeds. Happy families, productivity quotas, the glorious stability of the preserve. She spat the last word like poison. But the whispers, Jax, the whispers are getting louder, from the outer agridomes. From the deep mining colonies on Luna Secundus, people are vanishing, not just disappearing, erased, like they never existed. Jax finally lifted his head. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue against his weathered skin, held a depth of exhaustion that went beyond mere lack of sleep. It was the fatigue of a man who'd spent decades fighting shadows. The Cathar don't erase, he stated flatly. They archive, they catalog, they preserve. Even dissent gets filed away neatly. He pushed his bowl away, the broth untouched. Unless it's not the Cathar doing the erasing, Ilara finished, her voice dropping even lower. She leaned forward, the steam from her cup momentarily obscuring her face. What if it's something else? Something inside the cage? A flicker of something dangerous crossed Jax's face. Not fear, but the grim recognition of a long-dreaded possibility. Before he could respond, the noodle bar's single, grimy window flared with an unnatural actinic blue light. Not the soft glow of the city's ambient lighting. This was harsh, surgical, alien. Both humans froze. Outside, the rain seemed to hang suspended for a heartbeat. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, 3 Cathar observers materialized on the rain-slicked street. They stood unnaturally still, their tall, segmented forms shimmering faintly, their multifaceted eyes fixed unblinkingly on the noodle bar's entrance. The low hum Jax always felt in his bones spiked into a painful throb. Cathar don't just appear in the lower districts. Alara breathed, her hand instinctively sliding towards the small, illegal pulse pistol concealed beneath her worn jacket. Not without cause. Jax's mind raced. Too fast. Too direct. The Cathar operated with meticulous, almost ritualistic slowness. This felt urgent, aggressive, wrong. His eyes darted to the back alley exit, a rusted fire escape leading to a labyrinth of service tunnels. Their only chance. Move? Now? He hissed, shoving his chair back. It scraped loudly on the wet floor. The lead observer's head tilted, a subtle insectile motion. A single slender limb, ending in delicate multi-jointed manipulators, extended slowly towards the noodle bar door. Not a weapon. An invitation. A demand. Alara was already moving, a shadow slipping towards the rear. Jax followed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He risked one last glance back as he ducked through the beaded curtain into the alley's stench of damp refuse and ozone. The observers hadn't moved, but their eyes, all 6 multifaceted orbs on the lead one, were now fixed directly on him. Not with curiosity, with assessment. And something colder. Something that felt terrifyingly like recognition. High above the gilded cage of Earth, suspended in the silent majesty of geosynchronous orbit, the Cathar Archive Prime hummed with the quiet energy of 1 trillion stored lives. Here, amidst crystalline data conduits and fields of softly pulsing bioluminescent flora, Archivist Z's Carl stood before the Grand Panopticon, a vast curved screen displaying 1,000 simultaneous feeds from the Terran Preserve. Zerakal's chitinous carapace shimmered with subtle shifts of color, reflecting the complex data streams flowing across the Panopticon. Their thoughts, communicated through intricate patterns of bioluminescent pulses along their neural crest, were a symphony of cold logic and profound unease. Anomaly detected. The thought phrase resonated silently within Zorkal's mind, shared instantly with the collective consciousness. Subject designation, Jax Renner. Behavioral deviation exceeds preservation parameters, pattern matches, historical Terran conflict archetypes, pre-containment era. On the Panopticon, a frozen image of Jax Renner captured milliseconds before he vanished into the alley filled a central quadrant. Zorkal's multifaceted eyes dissected every pixel, the tension in his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the primal alertness in those pale blue eyes. It was a look the Cathar Archives knew well, the look of a cornered predator. The look that had scorched continents and shattered fleets before the Great Containment. Threat assessment elevated. Another archivist thought thread wove into Zorkal's awareness. Renner exhibits classic Deathworlder resilience markers. High pain tolerance, adaptive aggression, unpredictable social bonding. Deathworlder. The term, once merely a clinical descriptor for humanity's violent evolutionary history, now carried a new, chilling weight. The Cathar had contained the Deathworlders. They had civilized them, or so they believed. But what if the cage wasn't strong enough? What if the animal was remembering how to hunt? Zorkal's pulsed a command. On the Panopticon, the image of Jax Renner dissolved, replaced by cascading lines of genetic code, psychological profiles, and historical combat simulations, all converging on a single terrifying conclusion. Renner wasn't just a dissident. He was a potential catalyst, a spark that could ignite the dormant ferocity sleeping within the entire Terran species. Containment Protocol Theta must be initiated. Zerakal pulsed, the bioluminescent patterns along their crest flaring a deep, urgent crimson, before the specimen multiplied. Below, on the rain-lashed streets of New Atlantis, Jax and Alara ran, not just from the observers in the street, but from the crushing weight of 50 years of captivity. They ran through dripping alleys, past shuttered shops, displaying Cathar-approved goods, past citizens whose eyes held the dull sheen of resigned acceptance. Every shadow felt like a potential trap, every flickering light a surveillance drone. They reached the rusted fire escape. Jax boosted Alara up first, his muscles straining. As he scrambled after her, a low, resonant thrum vibrated through the metal grating beneath his boots. Not the Cathar hum, deeper. Older. Hungrier. He looked back. The street was empty. The observers were gone, vanished as silently as they'd appeared. But the feeling of being watched, it hadn't lessened. It had intensified. It felt less like observation and more like hunting. At the top of the fire escape, Alara hissed, pointing down a narrow service corridor. There, the old maintenance conduit, leads to the Undercity grid. Jax followed, his breath ragged. The Undercity, a warren of forgotten tunnels, jury-rigged power lines, and the desperate, the broken, the ones who truly lived outside the Cathar's gilded narrative. Their sanctuary, their last hope. They plunged into the darkness. The only light, the sporadic, sickly green glow of failing bioluminescent strips. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, damp concrete, and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like blood. Did you see their eyes, Jax? Alara whispered, her voice tight with fear she rarely showed. It wasn't just watching. It was knowing. Jax didn't answer. He was listening. Past the drip of water, past their own frantic breathing, there was another sound. Faint, rhythmic, like claws scraping on stone, coming from ahead of them. He grabbed Alara's arm, pulling her to a halt against the cold, damp wall. Quiet, he breathed. The scraping stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, pressed in. Then, from the darkness ahead, a low, guttural growl echoed. A sound utterly alien, yet chillingly familiar in its predatory intent. It wasn't Kenthar. It was something else. Something that shouldn't be down here. A shape detached itself from the deeper shadows. Low-slung, armored in plates that seemed to drink the feeble light, with multiple limbs ending in wickedly curved talons. Its head swiveled, revealing multiple clusters of eyes that glowed with a malevolent internal red light. It sniffed the air, a wet, rasping sound. Specimen located. A synthesized multi-tonal voice hissed from the creature, utterly devoid of the Cathar's usual melodic cadence. Containment breach imminent. Jax's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a hunter. It was a tracker. Sent by the Cathar, or something the Cathar had lost control of. The creature lunged, a blur of chitin and shadow, talons scything through the air where Jax's head had been a millisecond before. He shoved Alara backwards, drawing his own crude, scavenged shock knife. A pathetic defense against that armored horror. "Run!" he roared, meeting the creature's charge with desperate fury. Alara stumbled back, terror warring with training. She raised her pulse pistol, but the creature was a whirlwind of motion, its talons deflecting Jax's knife with contemptuous ease. One swipe sent him crashing into the wall, the breath knocked from his lungs. The creature turned its cluster of red eyes on Alara. It took a step forward, its synthesized voice dripping with cold finality. Terran life form. Designation Alara Voss. Threat level moderate. Termination authorized. Alara fired. The pulse bolt sizzled through the damp air, striking the creature's chest plate. It flared brightly, then dissipated, leaving only a faint scorch mark. The creature didn't even flinch. It raised a talon poised to strike. Jax, gasping, saw the glint of something in the creature's underbelly. A small, pulsing node of blue light, identical to the Cathar's signature energy signature. A weak point, a control node, with a guttural cry born of 50 years of pent-up rage and the primal will to survive. Jax threw his shock knife, not at the creature but past it, aiming for the node. The knife spun end over end, a tiny, desperate spark in the gloom. It struck true. The creature froze. The red glow in its eyes flickered violently. A high-pitched whine built in its chest, rising to a shriek of feedback. Then, with a shower of sparks and a final convulsive shudder, it collapsed into a heap of inert, smoking chitin. Silence crashed back down, heavier than before. Jax slumped against the wall, clutching his ribs. Alara lowered her smoking pistol, her eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. What was that?" she whispered, staring at the dead machine beast. Jax pushed himself upright. Wincing, he walked over to the creature, nudging it with his boot. Cold, dead. But the blue node, it was still faintly pulsing. He knelt, ignoring the pain, and pried it loose. It was warm, humming with contained energy. Undeniably Cathar tech. "It's a hunter," Jax said, his voice rough. "But not just a hunter. It's a failsafe, a cleaner." He looked up at Alara, his pale eyes burning with a terrible understanding. "The Cathar aren't just watching us anymore, Alara. They're culling us. And this," he held up the pulsing node, "this is proof they're losing control of their own damn zoo." He pocketed the node, the weight of it feeling like a death sentence. "We need to get to the archive. We need to know what they're really afraid of." As they turned to flee deeper into the Undercity, a new sound echoed through the tunnels. Not scraping claws, not synthesized voices. This was the deep, resonant thrum of heavy Cathar gravlifts descending. Dozens of them, converging on their location. The observers weren't hunting them with subtlety anymore. They were coming to collect. The Undercity became a tomb. Every tunnel, every ventilation shaft, every forgotten maintenance crawlspace echoed with the relentless bone-deep thrum of Cathar pursuit. Jax Renner and Alara Voss weren't just fugitives anymore. They were ghosts haunting the machine that built their cage. And the machine was waking up. Above, in the sterile perfection of Archive Prime, Archivist Zorkile watched the Panopticon feed with growing dread. The hunter unit deployed to terminate the Renner Voss anomaly had been destroyed, not disabled, destroyed by primitive Terran weaponry. The implications were catastrophic. It meant the specimens weren't just resilient, they were adaptable. They were learning to break the tools of their own containment. Worse, the destruction had triggered a cascade failure in the local surveillance grid. Blind spots bloomed like infected wounds across the preserve's nervous system. In those blind spots, whispers became shouts. Shouts became movements. Movements became resistance. The Cathar had built their zoo on the bedrock of absolute control. Now the bedrock was cracking. Jax and Alara moved like wraiths through the dripping darkness. The stolen Cathar node a cold, accusing weight in Jax's pocket. The thrum of the gravlifts was everywhere, a physical pressure against their eardrums, shaking loose grit from the tunnel ceilings. They'd lost the main pursuers for now, ducking into a labyrinth of collapsed service conduits. But the net was tightening. "Archive Prime is shielded," Alara panted, wiping grime from her face with a trembling hand. Her usual sharp composure was fraying at the edges, replaced by raw animal fear. "Even if we get past the orbital defenses, which we won't, the internal security is impenetrable. It's a fortress built by gods." "Gods who built a cage," Jax countered, his voice tight with pain but unwavering. He leaned against a corroded pipe, catching his breath. "And every cage has a lock. Every lock has a key, or a weak spot." He pulled out the pulsing blue node. "This is a piece of their tech. Their control tech. Maybe it's a key. Maybe it's just a map to where the locks are weakest." He studied the node. The pulsing light seemed to sync with the thrumming above. A sickening rhythm of pursuit. "They're scared, Alara. Truly scared. That hunter, it wasn't standard protocol. It was panic. They're afraid of what we represent. Not just us. All of us." A sudden violent tremor shook the tunnel. Dust rained down. The thrumming intensified, resolving into the distinct whine of repulsor fields powering up nearby. "They're scanning," Alara hissed, dragging Jax deeper into a side passage. "They've triangulated us." They burst into a wider chamber, an old geothermal venting station, long abandoned. Rusted machinery loomed like skeletal giants in the gloom, and in the center, huddled around a flickering fusion lantern, were a dozen faces Jax recognized. Ragged, hollow-eyed, but burning with a desperate fire. Mara, a former hydroponics engineer with hands stained green from algae cultures, clutched a jury-rigged arc welder like a club. Finn, barely out of his teens, his eyes wide with terror and adrenaline, held a scavenged plasma cutter. Jax, Alara. Mara's voice was a harsh whisper. We saw the hunters, heard the commotion. The Kythar are sweeping Sector 7G. They're rounding people up, just taking them. Where? Jax demanded, his mind racing. Where are they taking them? Marala shook her head, her face grim. No one knows. They vanish into those black transports. Gone. She looked at the note in Jax's hand. Is that Cathar tech? Jax confirmed. Proof they're not just watching. They're cleaning house. He looked around at the desperate faces. They're afraid. Afraid we'll remember who we are. Afraid we'll break the cage. Finn stepped forward, his voice trembling but defiant. Then let's break it. We've got numbers. We've got anger. What more do we need? Strategy, Alara snapped, her fear momentarily overridden by pragmatism. Rushing them is suicide. They'll just erase us all like they erased the others. Maybe not all, Jax said slowly, his eyes fixed on the pulsing node. An idea dangerous and insane was forming. They need the preserve. They need the exhibit. They can't just glass the planet, it's their prize collection. Their legacy. He looked at Mara, then Finn, then the others. But they can cull the herd, remove the problematic specimens. He held up the node. This tech controls their hunters. Maybe it can talk to other things. Maybe it can open doors. Maybe it can show us where they're taking people. He met Ilara's skeptical gaze. We don't attack the archive head-on. We go where they're weakest, where they're hiding the evidence of their fear. The detention centers. Ilara breathed, understanding dawning. The black sites. Jax nodded. We find where they're holding people. We free them. We show everyone what the Keller are really doing. Turn their fear against them. It was a gamble. A desperate, likely fatal gamble. But the alternative was waiting to be erased. The faces around the lantern hardened. The fire in their eyes wasn't just fear anymore. It was resolve. All right, Renner, Mara said, hefting her arc welder. Lead the way. Let's go remind these bug-eyed bastards why they locked us up in the first place. Zorvac stood before a private datasphere, isolated from the main panopticon. Within its shimmering surface, not feeds of the preserve but ancient Terran historical records played in rapid, horrifying succession. Images of nuclear fire blooming over cities, trenches choked with mud and corpses, orbital bombardments turning continents to glass. The raw, unfiltered savagery of humanity's pre-containment wars. The data is irrefutable, Zorvac pulsed. The bioluminescent patterns on their crests swirling with agitated crimson and deep violet. The Deathworlder potential is not dormant. It is metastasizing. Renner is not an anomaly. He is a vector. A new presence, manifested in the chamber. Overseer Kalororn, larger and more heavily armored than a standard archivist, their carapace etched with the sigils of ultimate authority. Kalororn's thoughts carried the weight of millennia and the cold finality of absolute power. Your fear is noted, Archivist, Kalorn pulsed, their voice a deep resonant thrum that vibrated the very air. But containment is paramount. The Terran species represents the single greatest repository of pre-sentient evolutionary aggression in the known galaxy. Its loss would be an irreplaceable tragedy for the collective's archives. Loss. Overseer, they are causing loss. Zorvaxol's pulses flared with near panic. They destroyed Hunter Unit Sigma 7 with primitive tools. They are coordinating. They are spreading the infection of defiance. Defiance is a predictable behavioral pattern. Kalorn pulsed dismissively. It will be catalogued, studied, ultimately neutralized. Protocol Theta is sufficient. Protocol Theta is erasure. Mirror, Irkal countered, a rare note of near heresy in their thought stream. It is destruction, not preservation. You speak of tragedy, yet you authorize the deletion of living specimens. Kalorn's multifaceted eyes fixed on Zofrkal, the light within them cold and unyielding. Preservation requires curation. Archivist, sometimes a diseased limb must be amputated to save the body. The Terran species as a whole must be preserved. Individual specimens, exhibiting terminal aggression, are expendable. A pause, heavy with implication. Your empathy for the specimens is noted, and concern your objectivity remains intact. The integrity of the archive depends on it. Kalorn's form dissolved, leaving Zerikal alone with the horrifying images of human history and the crushing weight of their own dawning realization. The overseers weren't just curators anymore. They were butchers, and the knife was poised over the entire Terran exhibit. The detention center wasn't a building, it was a scar on the landscape, a massive, windowless bunker sunk deep into the bedrock of the Siberian wastes, camouflaged by Cathar energy fields that bent light and perception. Getting in had been a nightmare of bypassing sensor grids using the stolen node as a crude jammer, scaling sheer ice walls under the cover of a manufactured blizzard, and losing 2 of their small group to silent, automated turrets. Now Jax, Elara, Mara, and Finn crouched in a ventilation shaft overlooking a cavernous holding cell. Below, hundreds of humans huddled together under harsh, sterile lights. Men, women, children. Their faces were blank masks of shock and despair. No guards were visible, only the omnipresent hum of the facility and the low, terrified whimpers of the captives. "They're just waiting," Finn whispered, his voice thick with horror. "Like cattle, waiting to be processed," Elara said grimly, her eyes scanning for threats, or erased. Jax studied the node in his hand. It was pulsing erratically, reacting to the facility's systems. The node, it's syncing with the main control hub. Down there. He pointed to a heavily shielded door at the far end of the cell block. "That's where they're controlling the hunters, where they're logging the erasures." "How do we get down there without triggering every alarm in the place?" Mara asked, her knuckles white on her arc welder. Jax looked at the terrified faces below. At the children. A memory flashed. His own daughter, lost decades ago in the chaotic early days of the containment, swept away in a Cathar relocation that never delivered her to the promised safe zone. The grief, long buried under layers of survival instinct, surged back, hot and sharp. "We don't sneak," Jax said, his voice low and dangerous. "We make a distraction they can't ignore." He looked at Mara. "Can you overload that main power conduit up there?" He pointed to a thick cable running along the ceiling of the shaft. Mara followed his gaze, a slow, grim smile spreading across her face. "Give me 5 minutes and a prayer." "Prayers are in short supply," Elara muttered, but she was already checking her pistol's charge. "Finn, you're with me. We cover Mara. Jax, what's your play?" Jax's pale eyes were fixed on the shielded door, on the node pulsing in his hand. "I'm going to have a little chat with the Keeper." Mara worked with frantic, expert speed, splicing wires, bypassing safety protocols. Sparks flew. The hum of the facility deepened, becoming a growl. Alarms began to blare, deep, resonant Cathar warning chimes. Chaos erupted below. The captives cried out, scrambling. From hidden panels in the walls, sleek, spider-like security drones unfolded, their optical sensors scanning wildly. "Now," Mara yelled. She slammed the final connection home. The main power conduit exploded in a shower of blue-white lightning. The lights in the cell block flickered violently, then died, plunging the cavern into near-total darkness, lit only by the emergency strips and the angry red eyes of the security drones. In the confusion, Jax dropped from the ventilation shaft, landing silently in the shadows near the shielded door. He pressed the stolen node against the access panel. It flared brightly, interfacing with the Cathar systems. The heavy door hissed open. Inside was not a control room. It was a shrine to cold efficiency. Banks of crystalline servers pulsed with soft light. And standing before a central console, their back to the door, was a single Cathar archivist, Zerikal. Zerikal whirled, their multifaceted eyes wide with shock, a profoundly un-Cathar expression. They hadn't expected intrusion. Not here. Not now. Terran Zerikal's synthesized voice was sharp, laced with panic. "You should not be here." Jax stepped forward, the stolen node held like a weapon. "Neither should you," he growled. "Not like this. Not erasing people. Preservation requires curation." Zerikal pulsed defensively, their crest flaring crimson. You are volatile, unpredictable, a threat to the stability of the entire preserve. Stability? Jax laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You call this stability? Locking us in a cage, watching us like bugs, and snuffing us out when we dare to breathe wrong? That's not preservation. That's fear. Zerlikal hesitated. The raw, unfiltered emotion in Jax's voice, the grief, the rage, the sheer, terrifying humanity of it was a data point the archives had never fully catalogued. It was messy, illogical, and utterly compelling. We feared what you were, Zarkul pulsed, the crimson fading to a conflicted violet. The records, the wars, the destruction. The records are history. Jax roared, taking another step. We're not those people anymore. Or, we don't have to be. But you never gave us a chance. You just locked us away and called it mercy. He gestured wildly towards the cell block. Look at them. Look what your fear has done. Sarakel's gaze flickered towards the console where a live feed showed the chaos in the cell block. Humans fighting back against the security drones with whatever they could find, fueled by desperation and the sudden darkness. Mara's arc welder was a blinding lance of white-hot fury. Ilara's precise shots were disabling drone sensors. Finn was helping children to safety. The archivist saw not mindless savagery, but courage, sacrifice, community, traits absent from the grim historical records. The overseers, Zayakal pulsed, their voice dropping to a near whisper. They see only the threat. They do not see this. Before Jax could respond, the main door to the control room slammed open. Not Katter. Human peacekeepers. Katter collaborators, clad in sleek black armor bearing the collective sigil. Led by Commander Varric, a human whose eyes held the cold, fanatical gleam of absolute obedience. Renner, Varric sneered, his voice amplified by his helmet. The archivist warned us you'd come, trying to corrupt the Keeper. Were you? He raised his pulse rifle. The overseers have authorized immediate termination for all insurgents. Starting with you. Zerikal stepped between Jax and the rifle. Peacekeeper. Stand down, they pulsed, their crest flaring a commanding gold. This specimen is under archival observation. Varric didn't flinch. The overseers overruled archival protocols. Archivist. Theta protocol is active. All resistance is to be purged. He aimed past Zetikal, directly at Jax. Say goodbye, Renner. Jax braced himself, the stolen node clutched tight. But it was Zayakal who moved. With surprising speed, the archivist slammed a manipulator limb down on the console. Alarms shrieked. The lights in the control room died. Emergency klaxons blared. In the sudden darkness and confusion, Zorakal grabbed Jax's arm. Their chitinous grip was surprisingly strong. This way, they pulsed urgently. There is another exit. They stumbled through a hidden panel into a narrow service corridor just as Varric's pulse rifle fired, the bolt searing the air where Jax had stood. The archivist was helping him. Why? They ran, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Sabratial guided Jax through the labyrinthine facility with uncanny knowledge. Why? Jax gasped, stumbling. Why help me? Because the overseers are wrong, Circa pulsed, their bioluminescence casting frantic shadows on the walls. Preservation is not control. It is understanding. And I finally understand. They stopped at a heavy blast door. This leads to the primary data core, the heart of the archive, the records of everything, including the truth about the containment. Zerikal interfaced with the door controls. It hissed open, revealing a vast chamber filled with towering crystal and data spires, humming with immense power. In the center, suspended in a column of light, floated a single massive data crystal, the core archive. The truth you seek is there, Zorakal pulsed, pointing a manipulator limb. But accessing it will trigger the ultimate failsafe. The archive will self-destruct to prevent data corruption. Jax stared at the glowing core. The truth, the real reason the Cathar built the zoo, was it worth dying for? Before he could decide, Varric and his peacekeepers burst into the corridor behind them, rifles raised. No more running, Renar, Varric snarled. Zurikal turned to face them, placing themselves squarely between Jax and the guns. Go! They pulsed at Jax, their crest blazing with a final defiant gold. Learn the truth. Tell them. Tell them. We were wrong. Varric fired. The pulse bolt struck Zurikal square in the chest. The archivist didn't cry out. They simply crumpled, their bioluminescence fading to gray, the light in their multifaceted eyes winking out. Jax didn't hesitate. Grief for the unexpected ally warred with fury. He lunged for the core archive the stolen node held high. He slammed it into a receptacle on the base of the crystal column. The chamber exploded with light, data streams, images, sounds. A century of Cathar observation flooded Jax's mind. He saw the initial contact, the Cathar horror at humanity's violent history, their decision to preserve before humanity destroyed itself or others. He saw the meticulous planning of the containment, the construction of the preserve, and then he saw the real reason for the fear, the reason for Protocol Theta. It wasn't just humanity's past violence. It was what humanity had become in the cage. The Cathar archives showed simulations, projections, data streams predicting the inevitable. Humanity, confined but not broken, would eventually turn its ingenuity, its resilience, its terrifying capacity for adaptation inward. They would develop weapons, strategies, social structures designed not for external war, but for internal domination. They would become the ultimate predators of themselves, and in their confined space that self-destruction would be absolute, total, and would render the entire Terran species unpreservable. The Cathar weren't just afraid of humanity's past. They were terrified of humanity's future. And the most horrifying part? The simulations showed it was already happening. The resistance Jax led. It was the first symptom of the very self-annihilation the Cathar feared. Their attempt to fight for freedom was proving the Cathar right. Jax staggered back from the core, the truth a physical blow. The alarms reached a deafening crescendo. The crystalline spires began to crack, leaking streams of raw data light. The archive was dying, and with it the truth. Varric and his peacekeepers advanced, ignoring the collapsing chamber, focused only on Jax. But Jax wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the dying light of Zurikal's form, at the truth burning in his mind. The Cathar weren't just jailers. They were doctors trying to quarantine a plague they believed was incurable. And the plague was humanity itself. The truth was a poison, a revelation that turned victory into ash. Jax Renner stood in the heart of the dying Cathar archive, the weight of a terrible prophecy crushing his spirit. Humanity wasn't just fighting for freedom. They were unwittingly fulfilling the very nightmare that had caged them. The Cathar weren't monsters, they were terrified custodians of a species they believed was doomed to devour itself. But Jax Renner was a Deathworlder. And Deathworlders don't accept prophecies. They break them. As the archive prime crumbled around him, as Varric's peacekeepers closed in for the kill, Jax made a choice. Not the choice of a freedom fighter. Not the choice of a revolutionary. The choice of a father who'd lost a child to the choice of a man who refused to let his species be defined by its worst possibilities. He chose to run, not away, but towards the fire. The crystalline spires shattered like glass, raining shards of solidified data that dissolved into static before hitting the floor. The air crackled with raw energy. Their ex-peacekeepers advanced through the chaos, their black armor gleaming under the dying light of the core archive. Jax didn't fight, he ran, not towards the exits but deeper into the collapsing heart of the station, towards the primary comms array, the one linked to the entire Terran preserve and beyond to the Cathar fleet. Varric roared in frustration, firing. Pulse bolts sizzled past Jax, vaporizing chunks of the disintegrating floor. Jax dove behind a buckling support column, the stolen node still clutched in his hand. It was dead now, drained by interfacing with the core, useless, but he didn't need it. He needed the truth. All of it. Not just the Cathar's fear but humanity's defiance. The courage in the detention center. Jorikal's sacrifice, the spark that refused to be extinguished. He spotted the comms console, a massive multi-screen interface miraculously still intact amidst the ruin. He sprinted for it, dodging falling debris and energy discharges. "Stop him!" Varek bellowed. A peacekeeper lunged. Jax sidestepped, using the man's momentum to slam him into a sparking console. The peacekeeper screamed as energy arced through his armor. Jax didn't look back. He reached the comms array. His fingers flew over the alien controls, guided by instinct and the fragmented data still echoing in his mind from the core. He bypassed security protocols, overrode firewalls. He wasn't trying to hack. He was trying to broadcast. On the main screen, Cathar Overseer's face. Cathara appeared, cold and furious. "Renner, cease your sabotage. The archive is lost. Your species is forfeit. Listen to me, you arrogant bug." Jax yelled, his voice raw, amplified by the station's failing systems. "You think you know us? You think you've seen our future? You're looking at a mirror." He slammed his fist onto the console, activating the galaxy-wide emergency broadcast channel, a channel that Katha reused only for catastrophic alerts. Every screen on Earth, every Katha wrestle in orbit, every listening post across the collective would hear this. This is Jax Renner, to every human in the preserve, to every Cathar watching. You want to know what humanity is? It's not just the wars, it's not just the fear. His voice cracked with emotion, but held strong. It's Mara risking her life to overload a power grid for strangers. It's Finn shielding children with his own body. It's Zirkal, a Cathar archivist, dying to show me the truth because he believed we could be better. He gestured wildly at the collapsing chamber, at the images of human resistance flashing on secondary screens he'd pulled up. "You see chaos? I see choice. You see the start of self-destruction? I see the refusal to be destroyed. We are not your prophecy. We are not your exhibit. We are alive, and we choose not to be the monsters you fear." He turned his burning gaze directly into the main camera, into Kodslorn's cold eyes. "You built a zoo because you were afraid of the animal. But you forgot one thing, Overseer. Animals don't just live in cages. Sometimes they break them. And sometimes they run the whole damn zoo." He input the final command. Not a weapon, a data dump. The entire unfiltered truth. The Cathar's fear, their simulations, Zirkal's sacrifice, the footage from the detention center, his own desperate plea, blasted out on every frequency, encrypted with a key only human tech could easily crack, but visible enough to the Cathar to be undeniable. The console exploded in his hands, showering him with sparks. The broadcast was sent. Korvang's image flickered, replaced by static. Varek and his remaining peacekeepers stood frozen for a heartbeat, stunned by the raw, unvarnished humanity of Jax's words, by the sheer audacity of the broadcast. Then Varek snarled, raising his rifle. "Traitor! You've doomed us all!" Jax didn't flinch. He looked past Varek, out through a shattered viewport. Below, on the gilded cage of Earth, lights were flickering on in cities that had been dark for decades. Not Cathar lights, human lights. Rebel lights, signals, responses to his broadcast. A slow, grim smile touched Jax's lips. "No, Varek," he said, his voice suddenly calm. "I just gave us a fighting chance." He turned and ran, not towards an escape pod, but towards the station's primary reactor core. The only way to ensure the Cathar couldn't simply rebuild their cage. The only way to force the galaxy to see what happened here. Varek fired. The pulse bolt caught Jax in the back. He stumbled, fell to his knees, but kept crawling towards the reactor access tunnel. The pain was immense, but the image of his daughter's face, the faces of the people in the detention center, Zarkal's dying light, they were stronger. He reached the manual override for the reactor containment. With the last of his strength, he slammed his palm down on the emergency release. Alarms that had been screaming reached a final, ear-splitting shriek. The core chamber flooded with blinding actinic light. Varek and his peacekeepers were thrown back by the concussive wave as Jax Renner, the man who refused to be a specimen, vanished in the heart of the exploding Archive Prime. The explosion of Archive Prime wasn't just a flash in the sky, it was a detonation of truth. Jax's broadcast, combined with the visual spectacle of the Cathar's central archive being destroyed by a human, ignited the preserve like dry tinder. From the frozen wastes of Siberia to the sun-drenched domes of New Atlantis, humanity rose, not as a mindless mob, but as a coordinated, furious network. The peacekeepers, their faith in the Cathar shattered by the broadcast in the sight of their orbital fortress dying, fractured. Some fought for the Cathar, most laid down their arms, confused, ashamed, or simply choosing their own species. The Connaught fleet in orbit, reeling from the loss of their command center and the shocking revelation of internal dissent and archivist betrayal, hesitated. Protocol dictated overwhelming force, but the broadcast, the images of human courage, the sacrifice of Zirkal, it created a schism within the collective itself. Was this truly the self-annihilation they feared? Or was it something else, something unpredictable? On the ground, Ilara Voss, Mara Thin, and thousands like them didn't wait for answers. They seized Cathar tech, drones, energy weapons, communication arrays. They didn't just fight the remaining peacekeepers or the automated defenses. They started hacking the cage itself. Using the knowledge gleaned from Jax's broadcast and the fragments of Cathar tech they'd scavenged, they began to unravel the invisible walls. Gravity wells flickered. Temporal distortions stuttered. For the first time in 50 years, unfiltered starlight touched human skin. Overseer Kallorn stood before the main viewport watching Archive Prime's debris field expand. The cold certainty that had defined their existence was gone, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. The panopticon feeds from Earth were a nightmare of beautiful chaos. Humans not destroying each other, but building barricades from Cathar drones, building communication networks from shattered tech, building hope. The simulations, a junior archivist pulsed hesitantly. They did not account for this. For collective action born of shared truth. For sacrifice that inspires rather than consumes. Kallorn's multifaceted eyes reflected the dying embers of their archive. The prophecy was broken, not because humanity wasn't dangerous, but because humanity was more than its danger. They possessed a capacity for redemption, for unity in the face of oppression, that the cold logic of the archives had never quantified. Order the fleet to stand down. Kallorn pulsed, the command heavy with the weight of a universe shifting. All offensive operations ceased. Initiate dialogue protocols. It was the hardest command they had ever given. An admission of failure. An admission that the curators had been wrong. That the animal in the cage understood the zookeeper better than the zookeeper understood the animal. The Terran preserve was no more. The invisible walls were down. Human ships, cobbled together from salvaged Cathar tech and refitted pre-containment vessels, now patrolled the space around Earth, not as prisoners, but as guardians. The Cathar fleet remained, but at a respectful distance, engaged in tense, ongoing negotiations. On the surface, cities were being rebuilt, not in the Cathar's sterile perfection, but in the messy, vibrant, chaotic style of true human ingenuity. Gardens grew in the ruins of peacekeeper barracks. Children played under the open sky, pointing at the stars without fear. Ilara Voss stood on a newly constructed observation deck, overlooking what was once New Atlantis, now simply New Earth. She held a small, smooth stone, a piece of the collapsed Archive Prime recovered from the orbital debris. Jax's stone. Mara joined her, her hands no longer stained with algae, but with the grease of starship engines. The Cathar delegation arrives tomorrow, she said, her voice rough but steady. They want to discuss coexistence. Ilara looked up at the stars, no longer distant points of light behind a cage, but destinations. They're scared, she said softly. Still, aren't we all? Armor replied, a ghost of a smile on her lips. But we're not the monsters they thought, and maybe they're not the jailers we thought either. Finn approached, older, harder, but his eyes still held that spark. He carried a data slate. We've finished the first draft of the treaty terms. It's complicated. Ilara took the slate. The terms were a delicate dance, reparations, technology sharing, mutual defense pacts, guarantees of Terran sovereignty. It was messy, imperfect, human. She looked out at the bustling city below, at the human ships glinting in the sunlight, at the distant, silent Cathar vessels. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, full of unknowns, but humanity was no longer an exhibit. They were players, flawed, fierce, resilient players. She thought of Jax, of his final defiant broadcast. Sometimes they run the whole damn zoo. A slow, determined smile spread across Alara's face. It wasn't a smile of victory, but of beginning. Good, she said, handing the slate back to Finn. Complicated is honest. Now let's go make sure they understand one thing. She turned, her gaze sweeping over the city, the ships, the open sky. This isn't their zoo anymore. It's our galaxy. Final scene. Deep space. Unknown sector. Far beyond the Sol system in the ink-black void between stars. A single battered Cathar scout vessel drifted. Its hull was scarred, its systems running on minimal power. Inside, the lone pilot, a young Cathar archivist, barely out of their chrysalis, monitored long-range sensors. A faint signal pinged. Not Cathar, not Terran. Something else. Ancient, powerful, and heading towards the newly liberated Terran sector. The archivist's multifaceted eyes widened. Their bioluminescent crest pulsed a deep, urgent amber, the color of profound discovery and profound dread. On their screen, the signal resolved into a symbol, a stylized spiral galaxy, overlaid with a sigil of chains being shattered, and a single repeating message in 1,000 languages, including newly added Terran Standard. The cull has begun. Prepare your exhibits. The archivist stared at the message, then at the star charts showing the trajectory of the incoming fleet. A fleet of unimaginable scale, dwarfing even the Cathar collective. Their thoughts raced, cold logic warring with the terrifying memory of Jax Renner's words echoing across the galaxy. They built a zoo for humanity. The archivist's manipulator, limbs trembled as they initiated an emergency priority hail, not to the Cathar homeworld, but directly to the fledgling Terran Defense Command. Now the animals are running the entire galaxy. The incoming fleet wasn't Cathar. It was something older, something that saw all sentient life as exhibits. In humanity, the newly freed, fiercely defiant Deathworlders were now the galaxy's first line of defense. The archivist sent the warning, their final thought a silent plea echoing Jax Renner's defiance across the light years. Run the zoo, or become the